Hi everyone, welcome to what is the second talk in a new series of webinars by Sussex Ornithological Society. My name's Jack Thompson. I'm a Conservation Officer for the RSPB and also a member of Sussex Ornithological Society, and I'm going to be your host for this evening. So, we're really delighted to have Matt Eade providing a talk for us tonight. Matt was upon a time a regular feature on the Sussex birding scene, but now resides in Hampshire where he works for Nature Trek. Matt grew up in Sussex in the coastal town of Seaford and lived in the area for over 25 years, where most of his time was spent getting up at the crack of dawn and going out birding on his local patch. Matt also regularly featured at any rare bird sighting, and we'll be talking about that very subject tonight. So I will now pass everyone over to you, Matt.
Okay, that's great, Jack. Thank you very much. And a very good evening, everyone. I'll just share my screen. That's great. A very good evening, everyone. And thank you very much for joining me this evening. For those that don't know me, I used to be a very active birder in Sussex with almost daily visits to my local patch of splash points, Seaford Head and Cuckmere Haven. But now I live in Hampshire for work purposes, though I do try and get down to Sussex at every opportunity. But I still am a regular feature at any rare bird sighting in the county. So much is my love for my personal Sussex list, which currently stands at around 327. It's not all about the bird. Seeing all the familiar faces from past years is also a treat at any twitch. Thankfully, over the years, I have managed to find a fair few rarities as well, namely the county's only river warbler in 2009 at Beachy Head, which was a co-find with my good friend Steve Dawson, the county's third American golden plover and the county's fifth semi-palmated sandpiper at Cuckmere Haven, and of course the famous lammergeier from a couple of years ago, these being amongst the highlights from the many others I have been very fortunate to find. And it just goes to show you 100% need to be in the right place at the right time. Sometimes, though, it's not just about the bird in question, which astounds me, although admittedly that is mostly the case. But sometimes the story on how a bird was found is just as remarkable in itself. And towards the end of tonight's presentation, I will touch upon a few such occurrences where the find is just as incredible as the bird itself. So tonight is mostly a general overview on the rare birds which have been seen in Sussex, but also a bit of storytelling for some of the more recent rarities too, plus a few species to look out for in the future, which are yet to make it onto the county list. So I hope you enjoy it, and thank you again very much for joining tonight. Okay, so I'm going to start off with what makes a bird a rarity. So usually it's fewer than 5 records in a single year, although of course some species can have these eruption years where numbers supersede that rule of 5. And in 2020 was a prime example of this with hoopoes, for example. During lockdown, roughly 25 or 30 individual records were submitted to the SOS, which is just an astounding figure, and just goes to show that although a rare bird is usually fewer than 5 records, it can be a freak year as well, which it was for the hoopoo in 2020. And of course, it's not just from a UK perspective, where a rare bird has to be a rarity in Sussex. So twite, corncrake and dipper, for example, all these species are of course UK residents, yet they are very rare in Sussex, and especially the latter, the dipper, which hasn't been seen in the county for donkey's years. So if anyone does happen to come across a dipper in the rivers of rural Sussex, please do put the news out, and that will please many people, no doubt. Okay, so another reason how you can tell you've arrived at a rare bird, maybe unbeknown to you or maybe known to you, is a twitch such as this one. This was on the beach at Church Norton back in, I believe, 2018 for the American Royal Tern, which only spent a single afternoon on site and a very early awakening the next day before flying out to sea and never to be seen again in the county. And so a twitch such as this, the first record ever in Sussex, is of course going to attract a big crowd, but it's sometimes the looks of the bird that draws in a bigger crowd, but it can also be the number of records as well on the county list. So it does vary the group size, but a twitch is probably one of the most stressful things that have occurred in my lifetime, and there's been many of them as well. But it's, of course, there's the sudden rush at the start of a twitch. You've got to drive as carefully as you can, and you eventually get there. You're sprinting to all the people gathering on the ridge. You're looking like a tiny bit of a muppet, really. You're sweating and panting away. And then when you finally laid eyes on the bird, that's when you can relax and chill out, and then look very smug when you turn around and look at everyone else trying to do exactly what you were just doing, running and panting and making a bit of a fool out of yourself. But it's all part of the birding scene, especially at a rare bird. But I strongly recommend that if you are yet to take up twitching, is basically not to concentrate on the numbers, because it will just be a very stressful lifetime of bird watching. So just stick with the bird itself, and from experience, try to avoid the numbers game if you can. Okay, so the most recent Sussex additions onto the county list. So the Sussex list currently stands at 408. That's not too bad, especially for where we are positioned between Kent and Hampshire. Not the most ideal place. So that is a very decent number indeed. And just on the left there is a list of the 5 most recent additions onto the county list. So of course the common nighthawk in 2020 at Church Norton, that's still a very deep wound amongst myself and many other Sussex birders, especially for those, I'm sorry if you're watching, but arrived at the site literally seconds before the bird flew off high to the east and never to be seen again. The northern mockingbird, of course, a very famous bird. It spent all day around Pulborough. I'll touch on that bird a little bit later. The American robin, last year, of course, that was a famous rarity, hanging around for a fair few weeks. And thankfully for me, I had arrived in Jamaica the day it happened to turn up. So thankfully it stayed around for another week, allowing me to go and see it. The brown booby, some of you may have forgotten about in 2022, last year, which arrived on Hove seafront for an afternoon before being picked up and taken into care. And of course, this year we've already had a new bird for the county list, and that's the little swift that was seen for only about 25 minutes at Sovereign Harbour in Eastbourne. So it's been a topsy-turvy few years, birds hanging around, but quite a fair few birds not hanging around as well. But if you look at that theme, there's certainly an American bias on the most recent birds to have made it onto our list. And the brown booby is almost certainly from that side of the Atlantic as well. So we're doing very well for the American species for the time being. Okay, so how do they get here? There's usually three methods in which they do get here. Of course, there are many others as well, but these are the 3 most common ways in which birds do arrive on our Sussex shores. So the most obvious, of course, is that they have blown off course. And this is more apparent in the autumn. For example, if there's a strong easterly airflow, then we're highly likely to get a good scattering of yellow-browed warblers, just for example. And this can happen in the spring as well. If there's a strong southerly airflow, then we get a number of birds overshooting and arriving on our shores. So that's one way. Ship assistance, that is not as a common theme probably in Sussex as it is in either Shetland or the Isles of Scilly or Cornwall, for example. But the white-throated sparrow that was seen in Barkham 2 years ago, which lingered for probably a few weeks, a few months, in fact, allowing everyone to go and see it, which was fantastic. That was almost certainly ship assisted, although of course there is no way to prove this. So it goes on as category A onto the county list, which is of course fantastic. But more than likely, the American vagrants that do make it into Sussex have almost certainly been ship assisted, unless there's a major fast tracking storm system from the eastern American seaboard across the Atlantic and up the English Channel. If that chain of events occurs, then there's a good chance a few more American vagrants could well make it into Sussex. And lastly, there has been a recent study in the fact that the Earth's magnetic field is under disturbances from time to time. And when birds migrate, that is when they change their course of routing. And so, a stray bird could easily make it into the UK and, of course, into Sussex as well. So those are the three most common ways in which a bird could get here. But of course, there are various factors going on which could change that. And of course, not all birds are successful in their arrival either. This yellow-billed cuckoo, which actually turned up on my local patch a fair few years ago now. This was only the second yellow-billed cuckoo in the county, but it was the second dead one as well. So there's still yet to be a live yellow-billed cuckoo in the county. But it just goes to show that this long migration or different habitat does take its toll on the birds, and unfortunately this yellow-billed cuckoo succumbed to its travels. But still, if a yellow-billed cuckoo is turning up on your patch, and it doesn't matter if it's Seaford Head or anywhere in Sussex, it just goes to show you have no idea what might turn up on your local patch. So the rule of thumb is keep heading out, keep searching, and eventually you will strike gold, I promise. Okay, so in terms of rarities, the times are certainly changing. For those of you watching tonight, I hope some of you remember the scene from 2006 where a flock of 8 cat egrets turned up at Piddinghoe, and this caused a major stir amongst not only county birders, but birders from far and wide in the UK, because cat egret back then was still a rare bird, whereas now, of course, a group of 8 is technically a small flock, especially if you're in West Sussex. So it just goes to show that times are changing. So what once were rare birds are now a breeding bird in the county. But of course, they are changing in the opposite direction as well. So if we go back to the 60s, 70s and early 80s, soul buntings were a regular feature in coastal East Sussex especially. And the last documented record of soul bunting in the county was in 1996. So this is a bird that has just completely vanished from our countryside, mainly due to human interference, but it just goes to show that, unfortunately, that some birds are doing well, but of course others are not as well. And another example in this is, of course, the willow tit. I think the last confirmed sighting in the county, please correct me if I'm wrong, but was in 2015, and that species is probably now extinct in the county as well. So these birds are now technically rarities from a Sussex point of view, but of course if you were to go to the West Country or up north, they are still a regular feature. Okay, so when and where can you expect to see a rarity? So rarities turn up annually in Sussex. You won't go a year without seeing a rare bird if you are a keen birder and don't mind to travel here and there every now and then. Rare birds do turn up. We are very fortunate being here on the south coast, and especially with the certain land formations, the cliffs, for example, are a great attraction to incoming vagrants. So we do very well here for rare birds. And during the spring, species can overshoot their breeding grounds on the near continent and arrive here into Sussex. So a prime example of that is the species to the right there, and that's of course the European bee-eater. They turn up annually, usually at around Beachy Head. If you happen to be around Beachy Head late May, early June, you could stand a very good chance of finding your own. But despite myself spending many hours along the coast, I've still yet to find a bee-eater, and that's probably because I've not been doing my birding up at Beachy Head. So if you do want to find one, then that is the place to go. And say, as I said earlier, a constantly southerly airflow is by far the best wind to attract not only bee-eaters, but of course sirens, woodchat shrike, for example, subalpine warbler, alpine swift, all these species which overshoot their breeding grounds, we stand a very good chance of finding here in Sussex. And here are just some of the prime examples of some of the more favoured locations, let's say, on where to go and find a rarity. But these sites are only here because there are people regularly watching these sites. So Hastings Country Park, there's a couple of people that are always going up there, and of course finding the odd bits and bobs. Beachy Head, prime example, people have been watching here since the 1960s, and a whole wealth of rare birds have been discovered between now and then. Seaford Head in Cookmahaven, my patch, does well for rarities, as does Sheepcote Valley, so an inland valley just to the east of Brighton, but at the western end of the cliff line, which certainly has a benefit to this well-vegetated valley on the outskirts of Brighton. And then as we track west along the Sussex coastline, Climping Gap, of course, this is now regularly watched by dedicated patch workers, and of course has turned up a good bird every now and then, especially last year. The long-staying barred warbler was just a prime example of that. And yes, of course, the boys down at Selsey Peninsula, they do a grand job of finding a whole host of excellent birds throughout the year. And that's exactly what it takes. It takes a dedicated patch worker to go out almost on a daily basis just to check the regular birds. And hopefully there's one in amongst the more common birds. So there we go. Those are the more regular sites. But of course, rare birds turn up anywhere. If you go inland, if you watch the site regularly enough, I say, you will strike gold at some point. And of course, birds do turn up in nets as well. So there's several ringing stations situated in Sussex, scattered far and wide from west to east. And of course, these are very good spots to trap and ring these rare birds. Of course, bird ringing stations are not about trapping these rare birds. They're about studying the long distance migration of our migrants. But of course, there's one or two which are bound to be found every now and then. So this aquatic warbler from, I think, 2016, 2017, that was a great catch in the Cookmere Valley. And of course, last year as well, also in the Cookmere Valley, there was a rustic bunting, only the 5th record for Sussex since 1960. So if you do go ringing regularly, again, this is another great way to try and see a rare bird. But of course, it is slightly cheating from a rare bird point of view, but they all count, which is great. Okay, so just following on from the when and where, autumn is, of course, usually the best time of year to find a rare bird. And that's mainly because the sites are less well vegetated than they are in the spring. But also the birds tend to linger that much more as well. And that's because they're a bit disorientated and they're trying to feed up before continuing on their journey, but also they're just not in as much of a rush as they were during the spring to try and get to their breeding grounds. So they're more chilled out in the autumn, which gives us more of a chance of finding them. And a prime example of this, I relate back to a find that I had back in 2009 of a barred warbler. It had probably been there a few days, but it stayed for another 5. And I only saw it on 3 of those 5 days. So you can go one day and there's nothing, but the bird could well be there. And the next day you may eventually see it. So it's very beneficial in the autumn when the birds do tend to linger that much more. And of course, as I said earlier, an easterly airflow from Siberia or Central Asia is very likely to turn up something here in Sussex, though of course not quite the numbers that one can experience on the east coast of England, especially Yorkshire upwards, where they get a staggering amount of rarities. Just quickly, that bird there is a Rad's warbler. That was at Beachy Head last year. Okay, and this here's a map of indicating where these species may well come from. So not all come from the Far East, some come from Scandinavia, for example. If a red-flanked bluetail was to turn up in the county anytime soon, there's been 3 of them now, but yet not one of them has been twitchable. But between Scandinavia and Siberia, it's probably where the bluetail would have come from. At the Far East, Rad's warblers, yellow-browed warblers, that's where they would come from. And just goes to show that an easterly airflow is vital in sending these vagrants our way, because that is a big distance that they have to cover. Then the Central Asia and of course Southeast Europe as well is where I would say we get the majority of our vagrants from. And lastly, on the when and where, so Sussex, I think, can be very random. Rarities tend to spring up in the most unlikely places at the most unlikeliest time of year. This American robin, which I'm sure most of the people watching tonight saw, is a prime example of that. Turning up in Eastbourne in February, you think you're safe going away on a trip during the cold winter, the depths of winter yet. First day in Jamaica, and boom, an American robin turns up, which probably had arrived into the UK in around October, November time. But of course, it wasn't picked up until February. Well done to the observers, of course. And yeah, an absolute great bird. But of course, a very random event indeed. And the little swift that was discovered only a few months ago in Eastbourne, that is exceptionally random, in my opinion. I've been in South Africa around January time and seen flocks of little swifts on their wintering grounds, which is exactly where this individual should have been. Again, you think you're safe the first week of January, but it just goes to show that you're never safe in Sussex. Things can turn up at any time of year. The pied rarity back in 1990 turned up in July. So there we go, just a few random birds there that have turned up at the most inappropriate times of year. Okay, now to the fun part. So the top 5, or my personal top 5 Sussex rarities since 1960. Now, of course, since 1960, I've not seen but one of these. So, but there have been some incredible rare birds over that period of time. And this list is just rather mouth-watering. And if you have seen any of these, I don't think you can raise a hand on this, but it'd be interesting to know at the end whether you have seen. So the first one, in my opinion, and you're going to have to bear with me on some of the photos of these, was the stunning wall creeper way back in 1977 at Hastings, which hung around for only 3 days, I believe, and was last seen flying south out into the English Channel on a very early morning, much to the horror of people still arriving on site. But I think, and although it's the 3rd county records, have been 3 wall creepers in Sussex, I really think this has to be one of the best rarities the county has had during the period between 1960 and present day. Of course, it's just a stunning bird anyway. And yeah, just absolutely incredible. So if you did, if you are watching tonight and you did see this, please let me know at the end. I'll be very interested to know. So wall creeper, I think that's number 1 for me, but although this is not in any particular order. The Soarer at Pagham Harbour in 1985, just another incredible find and incredible bird for Sussex. So Soarers are from North America, but you just can't imagine a bird like that flying across the Atlantic, or even being ship assisted across the Atlantic. You can't imagine the Soarer just wandering around on a vessel, but it did, and thankfully arrived for those that saw it at Pagham Harbour in 1985 and hung around for quite a few days as well. But just another staggering bird to have made it onto the county list. Nutcracker. Who would have thought a nutcracker would ever turn up in Sussex? And this is one of the species that have eruption years. So the crop in which they feed on the continent fails, basically. So they have to move away, and combined with favourable winds for them to migrate into the UK means that we can have invasion years of such species. And nutcracker was one of them back in the late 60s. This image was actually taken in 1968, which is incredible. It's a cracking image. And this was in Hampshire. This hung around for a few weeks, I believe. There have been a couple since, but only in the early 70s. So it's been nearly 50 years since the last nutcracker in the county. But it's just one of those that you just cannot imagine one will ever turn up again. But who knows? It's a mystery for sure. It's a bit grueling going through these images, especially when you've not seen them. Congrats to those who have. Black and white warbler at Beachy Head, just a mythical bird in every sense. The way it acts, black and white warbler has been a North American wood warbler, turned up at the right time of year in October, I believe. And I say it was just found in someone's garden up at Beachy Head and was basically seen creeping around the trees as they do. So not only stunning plumage, but also a stunning way in which they go about their business. And all in all, an absolute top rarity to be found in the county, and just completely unexpected. But there we go. And lastly, and one that I can thankfully smile about, because I was fortunate to see it, and hopefully many of you watching tonight did as well, was the Northern Mockingbird. And I'm just going to do a very brief story on this one, because I think not only is it a fantastic rarity, not only in Sussex standards, but in UK standards too. The fact that just the way it was found was incredible. So this northern mockingbird had spent most months during the winter in Exeter. It got to mid-April, and I finally got a message on the pager or bird app, for example, saying the northern mockingbird has finally left Exeter. So it's gone. There's no sign. Half an hour later, I got another text message saying that there's a northern mockingbird or a possible northern mockingbird in Pulborough, which is just bonkers. I wasn't sure whether to believe it or not. So of course you do what you do when you're stuck working. You text people, try and get people there as soon as possible to try and relocate it. And that is exactly what happened. This bird had obviously left Exeter the previous evening and flown overnight, and just so happened to pitch down in a garden where the lady, or the owner, sorry, should I say, happened to know that it was something different, and also happened to know that there was a very keen local birder a few houses down, and that is how it was confirmed. So the chances of this bird turning up in that garden, it could have turned up in 10 gardens down the road and completely unknown to the residents. And I think the way this bird was found this bird has to be put in the top 5 because it's just miraculous on all levels. And of course, I only spent one day in the county before moving off overnight. So very unfortunate for the people that didn't see it. But yeah, just an absolute incredible find. And so I feel very privileged to have seen this northern mockingbird. Okay, so something slightly different now. So I'm just going to list, well, there's a list there on the right-hand side of species only recorded in Sussex once since 1960. And this doesn't relate to birds that have recently been found. So this is kind of up towards 2016 period. And I'm not going to go through the whole list. You can see the list there, but I'm just going to mention a few species. So I mentioned pied rarity earlier. There's only a single record, and that was of a nice adult male at Newhaven Tide Mills in the bizarre month of July. And now pied rarities, they turn up on an annual basis in the UK. So it's rather bemusement why there's only been one in the county, because they're quite an obvious bird. They sit out in the open, obvious white rump like any wheatear. So it's strange how only one has been found. So certainly an overdue bird on our shores. Lesser scaup, only one in Sussex at Scotney Gravel Pits. And again, there's been one recently at Staines Reservoir, so not too far away from the county. So no doubt a lesser scaup will be on the cards sometime soon. And if we just scroll down the list, red-footed booby, I can't imagine that ever happening again. I bet you never know. Lesser sandplover, again, another one, which probably won't. Upland sandpiper, bridal tern, just a list of mouth-watering rarities, which I don't think are hardly ever going to turn up in the county again. And the bottom one there, the Pallis's reed bunting, which was actually identified a couple of years later, I believe, from the nets down at Pannell Valley. But there's only been one of those in the county. And again, I really can't imagine another Pallis's reed bunting will make it into Sussex anytime soon. So there are some mouth-watering rarities over the years. But say, just keep plodding on the patch, and you never know, you may strike gold. Okay, so some rarities from the previous 10 years I'm now going to mention, and these have a few stories to them as well. So I have to mention, as painful as it is, the common nighthawk, an absolute incredibly rare bird, but it's, of course, it's a nightjar. It's an incredible looking bird anyhow, and for one of these to turn up in Sussex was completely off the radar at all. So it arrived during a mid-afternoon offshore storm. It came in with the storm and was spotted by the photographer here coming in, and it just happened to pitch down in the woods. Not for too long. It was then seen flying along the beach towards dusk before flying high off to the east. And as I mentioned earlier, it was a very small crowd that saw this. Very few people got to see it, and there are terrible, horrendous stories of people rushing to the site across the shingle, only for the bird to be vanishing off high and eastwards, never to be seen again. So people were literally missing it by seconds. But it was just such an unfortunate thing. You would hope a night hawk may just hang around, be exhausted, but unfortunately it was obviously in a rush to get going. So common nighthawk, I can't imagine that will turn up in the county anytime soon again. So for those that saw it, congratulations. Okay, the recent little swift. This was even worse. This only hung around for about 25 minutes at Sovereign Harbour, spotted is around midday on the 2nd of January, a completely random date for little swift to be not only in Sussex but in the UK. But here it was, a lovely photograph by one of the lucky 8 who saw this bird. So say it just hung around for 25 minutes and was seen and was soon on its way eastwards, out of sight on a lovely clear day, as you can see in the background. So another bird, unfortunately, that did not linger for the masses to arrive. But there we go, you've got to take the rough with the smooth sometime. And this is another prime example of a bird that only hung around for a couple of hours. This semi-palmated sandpiper, which I was very fortunate to find in Cookmahaven back in 2018. It was a very strange occurrence. So a very good friend of mine, he had walked along the riverbank past a group of dunlin and kept on walking, and no doubt this bird was not there at that time because it showed very well, and you certainly would have seen it if it was theirs. So I arrived about half an hour later, start walking along the riverbank, and I suddenly spot this bird on the riverbank. And my feeling at the time, thinking this could well be a semi-palmated sandpiper. My friend came back along, and between us, we were getting all the photos to see the webbing between the toes, which eventually clinched the ID. And then a couple of hours later, no disturbance whatsoever. It just flew off high to the south and never to be seen again. So again, very unfortunate for the people that had travelled quite a long way to come and see it. And this was the only 5th record in the county. So crikey knows when the next one will occur. And one that I just have to mention, I'm really sorry, I know it's not been officially put on the county list, but it is a lammergeier. You can't fail to be impressed by this bird. So it has been placed in category D because it came from a reintroduced population in the German or French Alps. But this bird, of course, spent all of its summer in the Peak District, and as autumn progressed, this bird progressed southwards with it. And a few of us were thinking this bird is probably going to depart the UK from Beachy Head. So I had some annual leave and spent some time wandering around Beachy Head, only to be welcomed by this incredible bird one afternoon. Thankfully got the news out, which enabled many people to come and see this absolute unit of a bird. And it was just absolutely incredible. Despite being placed in category D, unfortunately, it's still high up on my memory list, and hopefully for most of you watching tonight, hopefully it's on your memory list as well. Okay, and the most recent of the rarities, the Penduline tits, that I'm sure some of you have recently seen down at West Rise Marsh. I think they have now departed. They were seen at least 2 weeks ago, but I don't think they've been seen since. However, this was another incredible find, and just goes to show how useful technology can be on occasions. So these birds, back in November it was, the finder who was walking along the sewer close to the reed mace where these birds have been hanging out at West Rise Marsh, and he had a microphone on his back. So unbeknown to him, these Penduline tits were calling, all admittedly quite faintly, but he just carried on walking and got home and then listened to the recording of any sounds that he had recorded, and a very high-pitched note came from the reeds, and it spread amongst a few of us, and it was quite apparent that these birds were pendulino tits. So the next day, the next morning, there was a small gathering of people, and lo and behold, out pops a couple of pendulino tits. So there we go, just another crazy find of birds that could have easily been missed. No doubt they would have been found by now anyway, but I think just how these were in fact found was quite incredible as well. Okay, so I'm just going to finish off this talk talking about a few overdue firsts for the county. So these are birds that have yet to have made it onto the county list. So one I haven't pictured this evening because it's quite bland is the Iberian chiffchaff. This surely has to be on the cards of being on the county list sometime soon. There's been multiple records now in Kent, in Hampshire, there was one last year. Surely there has to be an Iberian chiffchaff sometime soon. And I say the rule of thumb with Iberian chiffchaffs is to learn the song. But another species which I think really should have been on the county list by now, because they turn up in their droves usually up in Shetland and Northern England, Scotland, is the Arctic warbler. Quite subtle in its plumage, but say this is one that for sure should be on the county list sometime soon. And these breed not too far away from the UK, up in Scandinavia and slowly eastwards across Siberia. But their range, like many species that breed in Siberia, is extending westwards. So species like red-flanked bluetail, can someone please find a red-flanked bluetail? That'd be most helpful. But Arctic warblers, red-flanked bluetails, yellow-browed warblers, rustic buntings, all these ranges are extending westwards slowly but surely. So hopefully we will start to see these species creeping down into the county. Eastern olivaceous warbler, this is what we call a birder's bird. So it's quite unglamorous, but it is rather striking to the folk that know this species well. And this is a dream find for us sad people who like looking at the blandest of birds. But they do have their special habits, the wagging tail, for example, on an eastern olivaceous warbler. But this is one that you can just imagine finding, whether you're at Beachy Head or Seaford Head. And so it will be a first for the county, breeding in Southeast Europe, not as likely to turn up, I don't think, in the county, but I'm sure one day this will make it onto the county list. Brown shrike, you have to go to the far east really to see this species in vast numbers, wintering in dense populations in Southeast Asia, but they are turning up with more regularity in the UK. So fingers crossed again, there's been records in Kent, Hampshire, Surrey. So it's us in the middle, Sussex, as per usual, that tend to be missing out on these regular rarities. So brown shrike, again, I think will turn up sometime soon. Eastern yellow wagtail, how this hasn't turned up in the county yet, I have no idea. Multiple records in Kent, Hampshire, Dorset, Devon, and the list goes on. But Sussex must be one of the few counties, or the few coastal counties in the entirety of the UK is yet to have seen this in our borders. So fingers crossed, again, I don't think it'll be too long before this one. And lastly, the last species I'll discuss tonight, the greater yellowlegs, a North American wader. Of course, Sussex, especially in recent years, has seen big numbers, theoretically speaking, of lesser yellowlegs. There's certainly a few records in recent years. So with Hampshire gaining a few greater yellowlegs in recent years, I think it's only time that Sussex got one as well. Okay, folks, I think that's me sorted. Exactly 40 minutes. Wonderful. I hope you enjoyed this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. And if you do have any questions, please do feel free to pop them in the Q&A. It's great. Thank you very much again. And thank you.
Cool, brilliant. Thanks very much, Matt. I mean, wow, what a great whistle-stop tour of all the rarities in Sussex, and some really incredible highlights over the many years from what you've seen and what's gone on before. So yeah, there was some really amazing and beautiful species on show, along with actually a species seen this year, which is from my my personal absolute favourite group of birds, which is the little swift. And I mean, I was lucky to have the opportunity last year to see the colony that's in Chipiona in Spain, and the nest sites they've got down there at the fishing port. And it's just such a beautiful, smart little bird. Also, another bird that you covered, which is another species in my favourite sort of group of birds, or another group, which is the common nighthawk as well. And yeah, perhaps one day I'll get out out the house quick enough to see one of them turn up. But yeah, so as you said, Matt, we'll move over to the Q&A section of this webinar, and please do continue to pop in any questions into the Q&A for us to sort of cover. I just wanted to start off with a quick question myself, if that's all right. You showed a really great map of some of the key hotspots around Sussex, and I just wondered, what do you think makes these spots so special for rarities?
Yeah, good question. So, for example, Beachy Head, a site renowned for hosting a number of rare birds over the years. It's being extremely southern in its, the way it's situated, but also the cliffs are what birds tend to go for. So they tend to go for obvious landmarks during their migration. So of course some birds go for light as well. So that's why I think Sheepcote Valley is very good for rarities. That it's on the east side of Brighton, a very well lit area, and that's the most vegetated site. So Beachy Head has the cliffs, and birds tend to go for these, but Cuckmere Haven, it's the river valleys that also lure in birds. So birds use, when they're migrating, landmarks for their migration. They recognize it over the years, or it's just an obvious place to track down to the coast. So that's why Cuckmere and Littlehampton with Climping are good sites. And of course, the Selsey Peninsula, that again just sticks out into the English Channel, which again attracts the birds in. And whether they're coming from north, northeast, or from the south, birds get to the coast and tend to head to a point on their migration. So that's in general why these sites are good. But if you were to go inland, for example, so Blackdown is the most obvious high point within any particular area, especially up here in North Sussex. So that's another good area to go searching for birds, mainly raptors. They like to use the thermals, of course, but I did find a yellow-browed warbler there a few years ago as well. So yeah, it's just go show pretty much anywhere a rare bird can turn up. Little bunting, which I found at Iping Common a few years ago. There's nothing special about Iping Common at all. It was just coming across a flock of reed buntings and scanning through them, and bingo. So sometimes it's a complete fluke, but sometimes there is method to the madness as well.
Brilliant, yeah. So just keep your eyes peeled at all times. Cool. Right, well, we've got some good questions coming on through now. So just to start off with, we've got a question here that says the white-throated sparrow, for example, would never get back to the States. So where do they attempt to go? And also a follow-up question on that, and why was the Barkham one not seen anywhere else?
Okay, so yeah, the white-throated sparrow was a good one, of course, a fantastic bird, and it left at the appropriate time of year, mid-April, indicating that this was a genuine wild bird. So it was keen to track north back to its breeding grounds. It doesn't really know where it is. It could have thought it's probably in North America. It's come a long way. So yeah, probably thinks it's just in the southern states, and it's now migrating back north. But of course, it almost certainly ended up at the bottom of the sea, like unfortunately most rare birds do. That's just the nature of the game. It's very unlikely it would make it back to its home ground. So it could well make it back up to Iceland, for example. That's probably where it could have come down from. There's quite a lot of American vagrants which migrate across the Atlantic, thinking they're going south. They just get blown off course. They arrive on Iceland, and then they track down and heading south again, and they track down through the UK. But the white-throated sparrow, if it hadn't, or if it didn't perish at sea or end up on Iceland, it's a complete fluke, really, where these birds end up. And if it was to end up in a garden anywhere in the UK, the owner of that garden has to be interested in birds. Otherwise, these birds will just never get spotted or indicated, for example. So the white-throated sparrow in Barkham was a classic, where a local birder who I know well lives in Barkham. So the owner of the house just sent the photo to this person, and that's how the news eventually got out of that one. But if that was in some random garden where the people don't care about birds, it would have just gone amiss. And no doubt that happens on a multiple scale every year, especially for the more subtle birds, like, let's say, song sparrow. The regular birder or garden house owner, for example, they're not going to know what a song sparrow is. So there are many birds which filter through the gardens that just go completely unnoticed. So it's complete fluke, really, when these birds do turn up.
Cool, brilliant. Thanks, Matt. And another question, very similar, just different species, but where did the defunct yellow-billed cuckoos hail from?
So they are a migratory species in North America. So they breed up in the northern states, and then during the winter they head to the southern states, the Caribbean. Probably not much further south than that, maybe Mexico. But yeah, that's as far south as they go. So this bird would have got caught up in a storm along the eastern seaboard of America, and this almost certainly did what's happened with this bird, because there were a succession of fast tracking storms heading across the Atlantic, which bring in the American vagrants to UK shores. These storms only take a couple of days to travel across the Atlantic. Birds get caught up in them, and that's enough time for them to survive the journey. So they just get caught up and end up on our shores. And with the yellow-billed cuckoo, it almost certainly just got blown up the channel, and Seaford was almost certainly its first port of call before unfortunately perishing. That's the story of the yellow-billed cuckoo. But yeah, a migratory species in North America.
Cool, brilliant. And a different question now. So has a European roller been recorded in Sussex?
Yeah, there's been a fair few, actually, of the rollers. There's been a rather recent one as well. I can't remember the date. I do apologise, but there's been roughly 8 or 10 records of roller in Sussex. Unfortunately, they just date back from a very long time ago, but also they tend to be one-day birds in the UK. But I think Ashdown Forest is rumoured to be the location where a roller will hopefully turn up. And if it does, please put the news out and we will come and see it.
Brilliant. Yeah. No, everyone get talking. Just make sure, let everyone know. So another question. You mentioned a few known rarity hotspots, but are there any underwatched Sussex sites on your radar? I know you sort of covered this slightly, like kind of with some of those sort of they could turn up anywhere. But do you have any sort of underwatched ones that you'd recommend?
Yeah, crikey. I'll say up here in northwest Sussex, this is where I usually do most of my birding now. Up in northwest Sussex is an underwatched area. I think there's a couple of us that are up here, and that is a lot of ground to cover. But in terms of obvious places, it's quite hard to think of. There are many sites in East Sussex, the far east of the county, that don't get that much attention. So in the Breed Valley, for example, near Rye. Hastings Country Park, although I say a few people do go up there, for such a large area and for such an obvious migration point, it is majorly underwatched. So that is a really good spot to get to if you can. And the sites close where I used to live, between Seaford and Eastbourne, I've always liked the look of Sovereign Park. If you do live around Eastbourne, Sovereign Park looks nice and rare to me, and it's a place that I'm sure could turn up the odd bird here or there.
You mentioned that before as well, Sovereign Park. There was something that turned up there in your talk, wasn't there? I believe
Sovereign Harbour was.
Sovereign Harbour. Sorry.
But it's just next door. But yep.
Yeah. Cool. Brilliant. Another question. Any guesses as to next new rare breeding bird in Sussex?
Well, it's not exactly rare anymore, but great white egret surely has to be on the cards for that one. And that's just going by the regular theme of down in the southwest, England or Western England, in Somerset, great white egrets, breeding by a dozen. And with such a healthy population at Rye Harbour, I'm sure that will be our next breeder, or what was once a rare bird in the county.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Well, not so brilliant. Obviously, it's not exactly the nicest when you sort of like you've covered in the talk around sort of the plight of the willow tit and the the difficulties that species like that are facing right now. But yeah, no, thanks for that. So the next one is more of a comment. Just Coombe Valley Country Park, perhaps the most underwatched site with potential for rare birds.
Yes, superb place, and it's actually been redeveloped for the dog walker or bird watcher, but it's now a nice area to go for a walk. And it's a great site in the winter. You get plenty of water pipits there, for example, and it used to be the breeding site for marsh warblers in Sussex, but sadly no longer. But it just goes to show, it is a valley. There's plenty of lakes, there's plenty of vegetation there. It's surely a place that will turn up something good in the near future if people go there. That's the thing, you need people to get there for these birds, and not just rare birds, just for any birds to be found. That's the name of the game.
Yeah, that's a nice site. I've been there on family holidays. I've not seen anything rare turn up there, but yeah, keep looking, everyone. Jono asks, how likely is it in Sisticola?
Now, I probably would have said about 14 years ago that this would have been quite a likely species to turn up, but there hasn't been a UK record now for around that period of time. So 2008, 2009, there was a regular bird in Kent, and it kind of felt that this is going to be the next bird to breed on UK shores, not just Sussex, but in the UK. But they've just completely gone silent here in the UK, and they're not that far away. They're a stone's throw across the channel, yet they don't seem to be that migratory, unfortunately. So I think it's going to be a long time before sitting Sisticola gets on the county list.
Cool, thanks Matt. Another question here. So 70 hawfinches were in Arundel this week. Are they likely migrant birds or UK breeders?
Good question. I think Mark Malilou might be the man to answer this one, but they're certainly not all UK breeders. I would put in a fair shout that the majority, if not all of them, are migrants. Yeah, there we go, Mark. So Mark's just popped in a note there saying there could well be migrants. There is almost certainly a breeding population at Westing Woods. A couple of juveniles have been noted there in recent years, and no doubt the woods near Arundel are a perfect spot also for breeding. But there are, as you all know, a highly secretive species. So it just is very difficult to tell, but with such a big number of 70, certainly not all of those will breed here at all. So it will be a migrant for sure.
Yeah, it's quite a large number for a species as often is quite spread out in terms of its distribution. So, yeah, a bit of an odd one that. Next question we've got is, where is the best place to find the info about bird sightings other than Sussex Ornithological Society? Is there an app, for example?
Yeah, there are a couple of companies that do this in the UK. I won't name names. I'm not sure if I'm in any place to say names, but if you just Google rare bird apps, rare bird sightings, a couple of options will show for you. In Sussex terms, there are a couple of WhatsApp groups as well. So just ask around, and I'm sure someone will be able to let you into those as well.
Cool, brilliant. Thanks for that, Matt. Another question. So what does your decision-making process look like when you're deciding where to go? Do you have a bit of a set schedule that you like to do, or is it all based on weather systems and your experience, and perhaps just frantically sort of getting yourself prepared to rush off somewhere?
Yeah, so the rushing off is very random, just depends where the bird is and I will go. But yes, it's very much down to weather systems and experience as well. So I've been doing this for quite a while now. So yes, it's very much down to that. But in terms of weather systems, you're looking at a big weather chart, which doesn't just overlook the UK, but overlooks Europe or Siberia or the Atlantic. And that kind of dictates where one should go. But, in terms of not rare birds, but if I was to hopefully go and see a passage of Pomeranian skuas, I would look at the weather charts and see if there's a southeasterly wind coming up in the first week of May, and then I'll head down there and see some pom skuas. So yes, that comes down to both experience and knowledge of the weather charts, etc. But you can't pay too much attention to that either. You just, if you're very keen on rare bird finding, you just have to go out and hope for the best. And that's what most of mine and others' patchwork is. It's just dreaming about finding a rare bird, imagining a rare bird. I've spent most of my time birding actually imagining and not actually birding, which is never good. But it does give you drive. It does keep you entertained. So that's pretty much where that stems from. But yes, certainly the weather is a good indicator of where to go.
Cool, brilliant. And another question here, any crested tit sightings? Why are they in Scotland and France but nowhere else in the UK?
Yeah, this is a mystery, this one. But it's, I guess, kind of a simple answer. Crested tits are not migratory. So yes, they are in Scotland. So yeah, they obviously resided there for thousands of years. But the reason why they don't come down from Scotland is that there's no habitat in between. So crested tits are pretty much, around the Cairngorms, that area, a little bit further south in the pine forest as well. But if you look at any map, you'll see there's a major gap of habitat, pine forest, for example, between Northern England and Scotland. So that's why there's no crested tits, because there's just no habitat for them to move into to progress southwards. And that's the same for the crested tits in Northern France. I've actually seen the UK from Northern France watching a crested tit and just rather baffled as to how and why one hasn't been seen in the county. And that's just because the English Channel is a major obstacle. And that's the reason why a number of birds of prey also haven't been recorded on our waters. Griffon vulture, for example, the Netherlands can have a decent passage of them along the coast, but because the English Channel is such an obstacle for these birds, they just don't want to fly across it.
Cool, brilliant, great answer. Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time this evening. So, so as mentioned at the start, any questions that do come through from now and that are left unanswered, we can follow up with post meeting. But I just wanted to say a huge thank you to Matt for giving up his time to give us a fantastic talk this evening, and also to everyone for coming along to watch and listen. I do hope that everyone has a fantastic rest of their evening, and please do take a look at the next webinar on the 23rd of March. So yeah, thanks again, Matt. Thanks everyone, and see you all soon.